Good afternoon. Let me welcome all of you. I will moderate to this very special event. I'm Osman Serhat Karaman, Manager Digital SSM Archive and Research Space at Sabancı Museum. The conference series realized as part of the project Technological Arts Preservation, enacted the collaboration of Sabancı University and Digital SSM with the sponsorship of Digilog. Continue with the two-part series talk titled Preservation of Net Art Today. The preservation of net art is a very serious problem like other areas of digital preservation because browsers that display the pieces may no longer exist or other aspects of the technology need to preserve or emulate. For example, Adobe announced that Adobe Flash will die off at the end of December this year. That means after browsers updates, many artworks will disappear. First part of the event, Morgane Stricot from PAMAL group will make the presentation titled Telematic Media-archaeological Performance, the Afterlife of the Minitel Network. And this presentation is based on the article, The Afterlives of Network-Based Artworks, and the performance is presenting the reconstruction of the Minitel network almost 10 years after it disappeared. In France, Minitel was at the time kind of alternative to the internet in France. Welcome, Morgane, to Istanbul virtually.
So good afternoon. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Before giving floor to Morgane, let me introduce PAMAL Group. PAMAL Group is a European artistic group founded as a follow-up to PAMAL, Preservation and Art Media-archaeological Lab in 2013, composed of artists, media theorists, conservators, restorers, and engineers. And PAMAL Group creates its own works from network-based digital artworks that have disappeared or been severely damaged due to the obsolescence of networks, as well as computer software and hardware. Its work seeks to make visible to vulnerability of an arts form that is highly dependent on industrial logic. All the works that the collective reconstructs as close as possible to the original materialities, sometimes in a deficient way, are treated as archives. Dear Morgane, please, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Osman, for the invitation. It is always a pleasure. I'm gonna share my screen now. I think it's working. So today, Lionel, Armandine, and myself were supposed to show you a performance with a Minitel. Unfortunately, with the COVID situation and now that we are online, it is not possible for us to do this performance online, and you will understand why in a couple of minutes. So I have tried to do my best to show you our artistic artwork with a slideshow, and I hope you enjoy it. So today I'm representing the PAMAL group. Like Osman said, it is an acronym for Preservation in Art Media-archaeological Lab. So we are a European artistic group based in France, Germany, and Austria. We are composed right now of 5 persons. So Stéphane Bizet, engineer, Lionel Broye, artist and media archaeologist, Armandine Chasle, media artist, Emmanuel Guez, media theorist and archaeologist, and myself, media and digital art conservator restorer. So together, we are developing an artistic approach based on a media archaeological practice of conservation and restoration of digital and media artworks. Our work really seeks to show and to point out technological discontinuities and dying ecosystems. So we are reconstructing artworks that are that have disappeared or are really damaged by obsolescence. We are more specialized in networks. hardware preservation too. So I'll start by presenting you our research on the reconstruction of artworks made with the Minitel, then how we recreated the network itself. First things first, what is the Minitel? So you might not be familiar with this object and its related network, and it is totally normal because the Minitel is a French invention. We could describe it as the biggest fail of network history. I'm going to show you just a small video of how you could use the Minitel back then.
Dis, papa, quand est-ce que tu vas chercher ta voiture?
Regarde, je fais le 11, je tape le nom du garage, et après je suis la petite flèche.
Quand est-ce que tu vas chercher ta voiture?
Eh bien, je suis la petite flèche et elle me dit tout. Voilà, c'est indiqué, je peux y aller ce soir. Et comment j'y vais? Bah, c'est simple, j'ai plus qu'à suivre le chemin, là.
Pour plus d'informations, la flèche du 11. Annuaire de France Télécom, vous renseignez par tous les moyens.
So you could see it. So this French invention is the acronym of Médium interactif par numérisation d'informations téléphoniques, which means interactive medium by digitization of telephonic information. So it designates a passive computer terminal, like you can see on the slide. So basically, the Minitel is just a plastic shell with a keyboard and a 9-inch screen without any storage possibilities. It is connected, though, to the French service Videotex Teletel, operated between 1980 and 2012. The services are accessible from a telephone line thanks to a built-in modem, which provide 1,200 bits per second in reception and 75 bits per second in transmission. The Minitel was equipped with a T-socket for connection to the French telecom network, telephone network. The Minitel screen is a text matrix with a size of 25 lines and 40 columns in video text mode. It means 8 shades of gray for the black and white screen and 8 different colors for the color screens. It is based on its own coding system. So it is a set of graphic characters, each one made up of 6 bytes, which enables to display images in kind of a mosaic mode, a little bit like ASCII. The user had to call the 4-digit short number of the chosen service with its phone, wait for the dial tone, and then press connection enter to access the page. The concept of the Minitel has been also marketed in other countries under different names, such as Videotexto in Brazil, Alextel in Quebec, and Bildschirmtext in Germany. For example of use of the Minitel, there's the telephone book. You could also book train tickets, look up bank account, read the newspaper, or just chat with women on the famous service of the pink Minitel. Let's say it straight away, so there's no misunderstanding. The Minitel is not the ancestor of the internet. They evolved in parallel between the 80s and the 90s. So it was really 2 systems evolving at the same time. So it didn't appear before internet. They really arrived like slowly together. And of course, as any technical medium, artists have been interested in the Minitel. And famous artists such as Daniel Buren or Orlan, Eduardo Cax, John Cage, Vera Molnar worked and made artworks for the Minitel. So here you can see in a piece by Daniel Buren for the Minitel. These artworks were published in the Minitel magazine Art Access, founded in 1986, and directed by Orlan and Frédéric Devlet. Here is, for example, a Madonna by Orlan. For us, the project started in 2012, after France Telecom stopped the services because of a lack of users. Of course, they had long switched to the internet. And we also met Eduardo Cax that year, so who really triggered the project. From 1985 to 1986, the Brazilian artist Eduardo Cax created a series of telematic poems. I use the word telematic. It means with Minitel hardware, video text software, and Teletel network. So they consist of a corpus of primitive animations made for Minitel and were composed of 4 animated poems in the Alpha Mosaic video text format. Reabracadabra, Techao, Recaos, and Deus were visible online on public Minitel terminal, like the one you are seeing right now on the slide. The animation composed from the choreography of geographic shapes that constitute letters and words in 8 default colors of the Minitel appeared in a left-to-right scan typical of the Minitel grid display. You will see it in a video later. So the Brazilian Minitel video texto terminals, like this one, have disappeared. And in France, the Minitel became a dead technical medium on June 13th, 2012. The date of the definitive closure of services and the shutdown of servers in France. So you have to imagine that with this shutdown, all the French telematic artistic creation has disappeared in one day. The machines themselves, so those plastic shell, especially those in black and white, are still widely available on the second-hand market because the Minitel was distributed free of charge to all French citizens by the government. So they are still widely available, but they remain completely useless because, you know, in the absence of data sent from the server in video text format, they are just terminals. So they are just a screen and a keyboard. The only remaining traces of Cax poems are slides from 1986 from the Brazil High-Tech exhibition, and a video animation in QuickTime format produced by Eduardo Cax with graphic design software for exhibition and archive purposes. So this QuickTime animation remains a good basis for work, despite some inconsistencies. For example, the display from top to bottom and not by scanning from top to bottom and from left to right. There were also non-existent colors of the Minitel, and also impossible characters angles. It is therefore a reinterpretation that is not very convincing, but essential for us to get an idea of these animations. Also, the narration of the artist himself accompanies these traces and are, of course, of a great help for us to have a relevant interpretation of this video. So PAMAL's objective was to restore the experience of the animation on a Minitel terminal, with all the characteristics and aesthetic constraints that this implies. So this media-archaeological reconstruction approached the work according to its own layers of materiality. From the first layers, so the image and the physical interface of the terminal, to the last low-level languages on the one hand here hexadecimal, a language that can be understood both by human and machines, and sound on the other hand, the vector of communication between the Minitel and the server. So for this restoration, we needed a color Minitel, extremely rare. So the one you see here on the slide is a color Minitel. This one was really rare because only the black and white Minitel were distributed free of charge to the citizens. To have a color Minitel, you had to buy it, and usually it was only companies that were having those kind of Minitels. But we found one, like on a second-hand market, which was really fortunate. Then we needed a video text programming console. So this kind of big keyboard. Unfortunately, they have almost disappeared. We just found one right now on the second-hand market, but at the time of the reconstruction, we didn't have any. And to finish, we need a network, which is down since 2012. So we had one Minitel color, no programming console, no network. But we considered that the situation was not hopeless. So we started, so we had two stages into this reconstruction. First, the reconstruction of the artwork's code, and secondly, the reconstruction of the network. So all Minitel devices are equipped with a serial port DIN. This 5-pin DIN port made it possible to communicate directly with the Minitel through a serial connection without needing any modulation. Thanks to the STEM manual, which is the technical specifications of Minitel use, so the standard reference manual for Minitel systems, we were able to understand how the Minitel processed data. Then we were able to create an interface between the machine and our contemporary systems to provide data for the Minitel to process. So we were able to use the Minitel technology directly without compromising the Minitel's initial treatment of data by building an interface with Arduino, electronic prototyping board, using processing environment, and creating, of course, the bespoke connecting cable. Communication then occurred through a serial connection with the technical characteristic imposed by the Minitel itself. So we really didn't change the way the Minitel is processing the data. So here you can see the screen with the communication happening between the Minitel and the contemporary computer. Then, once we could communicate with the Minitel, we decided to reconstruct the poems almost manually. So here you can see me really drawing the different part of the poem on a paper. So because without the programming console, we had to place ourselves at the bit level, so the lowest level in the materiality of digital programming. We therefore edited the video frames with an hexadecimal editor. This meant to translate, so translating the animations into hexadecimal code in order to transmit them to the Minitel with grids and encoding tables, and recreating what was supposed to be the original frame, character by character, byte by byte, according to a manual transcription of the images on a grid. To do this, certain international standardized character sets or encoding tables exist, including the essentially alphanumeric G0 set and the G1 set, known also as semigraphic. So switching from one set to another was done thanks to code specific to the Minitel. With these sets, character type and color could be defined. Also, code that could control erasing the screen, blinking characters, or just placing the cursor on the screen. Now I'm going to show you, we filmed the screen of the Minitel, and I'm going to show you an example of the video text poems by Eduardo Cac on Minitel. So here you really can see the scanning effect from left to right and bottom, top to bottom. So you can see here that it's really slow animations. And since the possibilities related to the creation of video text image were relatively limited and constraints were really high, it seems probable that our recreated frames are similar to the original. Since a byte could only contain one character, we were able to measure how machinic constraints became aesthetic constraints, since those material constraints directly influenced the form of the image. So once the frames were edited, the Arduino program displayed all of the animation that composed the video text poems. In order to match the Brazilian experience as closely as possible, we chose not to have the animation scrolling continuously, but we created a homepage so that users could choose the animation they wanted to look at by interacting through the Minitel keyboard, thereby perhaps recreating something of the sensations felt by the original users at the time of creation. So at this stage, restoration was still incomplete, okay? As we get down further into the layers of its materiality, we got hold of enough key information to recreate a Minitel server. So the crucial missing link of this network-based artwork, okay? So this is at this point that we discovered that the Minitel was able to hear. Okay, data sent to the Minitel by the server is sound, or to be more precise, frequencies. One frequency for 0 and one frequency for 1. The Minitel hears the sound, decodes it in video text, and displays the images. The servers can therefore be considered as a sound image converter, and the telephone line as a vector for the sound. PAMAL therefore launched the second phase of this project by creating a local single-channel Minitel server, which used the telephone line, as it was the case for CAC's animation. So when the end of the Minitel was announced in 2012, it didn't take in account the existence of single-channel microservice and the activities of Minitel hackers. One of the solutions to the problem of the missing servers was found in the overlooked and unexplored history of the French telematic world, the Minitel Piracy. From the very beginning of Minitels, hackers were able to hijack the French telecom system to create their own single-channel servers. These microservers could be accessed with 8-digit phone numbers found in various computer journals and newspapers. They appeared as early as 1984 as a reaction against paid-for services. So the Minitel was free of charge for people, but to connect to the server of the French telecom, you had to pay, and it was payment per minute of consultation. So the hackers used the PSTN, which is still in place today, and because it's used by the main technology for internet service provider, like the ADSL. So technically, it is still possible to set up such microservers today. So during the golden age of the Minitel in France, from 1985 to 1995, the architecture of microservers was based on the V23 compliant modem connected to a computer. Operating with a simple telephone line, the Minitel only interprets sounds at the inputs and outputs. The server must be able to generate sound and capture this sound, which is what sound cards of all our computer, tablet, smartphones do. So we decided to choose to create a microserver using a sound card to simulate the Minitel servers of the 80s. Sorry. The sound cards are easy to program and can easily replace the V23 modem. So in our reconstruction, sounds enter the Minitel and its server first from the Minitel to the server. And I'm going to make you hear the sound of the frequencies. It's not really comfortable to hear, so just be prepared. So the 1 bit from the server to the Minitel, 1 bit corresponds to a 1300 Hertz frequency. The 0 byte with a 2100 Hertz frequency. Then from the Minitel to the server, so when people are typing in things, it has to go back to the server. 1 bit corresponds to 390 Hertz. And a 0 bit with 450 Hertz frequency. So a phone interface is needed to manage the telephone calls, and as such, automatic dial and hanging up is possible. So this is the sound you hear when you try to call the server with your phone. So the interface is controlled by a dedicated Arduino board, and this interface also had a duplexer that could, within a sound card, separate uploaded data from downloaded data on the telephone line. So from the server to the Minitel and from the Minitel to the server. Where's my mouse? So there's 2 steps were exhibited in 2014 in Aix-en-Provence to the exhibition Second Nature, Une archéologie des médias in Second Nature gallery. And we also exhibited in Paris, in Palais de Tokyo, for the exhibition Vision in 2015. So after this successful reconstruction of the video text poems from Eduardo Cax, we began the reconstruction of a telematic novel called L'Objet Perdu. In 1982, Jean-René Bader, Jacques-Élie Chabert, Jean-Paul Martin, and Camille Philibert founded the experimental magazine Toi et moi pour toujours. Under this label, they published 3 telematic novels, Asco, Vertige, and L'Objet Perdu. L'Objet Perdu was presented in the exhibition Les Immatériaux at the Centre Pompidou in 1985. It is a multiple-choice telematic novel. It consists of just over 250 screens. This novel allows visitors to the exhibition to navigate through the story of Olga and Maxim through multiple choices. So each screen has up to 2 to 3 choices, represented by the key 1, 2, 3, or next, which the visitor types on the Minitel keyboard to choose the next screen, and thus the next episode of the story. At the end, each story is compiled and editable so that the author can complete it with new ideas that do not appear on the preset screens. At the beginning of 2018, we found the trace of Jacques-Élie Chabert and Camille Philibert, who will then provide us with the printed version of the ASCO magazine, which can only be consulted on paper format, as well as a series of silk screen of all the screens of the Objet Perdu magazine. So during a 1-week workshop in April 2018, with the help of the 2 artists, we found from the silk screen prints and their memories a large part of the complex tree structure of this novel. So displayed first on the wall of our lab and then transcribed into a mind map, this tree structure guided the appearance of different screens, allows us to consider a partial reconstruction of the novel on the Minitel. Unfortunately, we quickly realized that the silk screens are whimsical. They are very far from resembling the Minitel screens. The colors are absolutely not coherent with the display on the screen. The delimitation also are not compatible with the grid display. We also learned that most of the screens were in fact animated. And this animation, on which we had only 1 sequence on the screen print, are completely impossible to reconstruct. But it was without counting on a happy ending. So here you're gonna see next a YouTube video where we found at 19 minutes, Jacques-Élie Chabert appears presenting l'objet perdu as one example among other use of the Minitel. So we can see the programming interface used by the artist and especially the animated screen of l'objet perdu. This video was really the core point where we could really reconstruct 3 screens with the animations and give us also an idea of the type of animation we had to do. So I'm just gonna let you watch this video.
Mais on peut aussi imaginer d'autres utilisations de l'appareil.
C'est Vénus, l'apparition de Vénus.
Et ça, c'est tiré de quoi?
Alors ça, c'est un des écrans de l'objet perdu, qui est un roman qu'on fabrique pour une exposition à Beaubourg.
Comment vous est venue l'idée d'écrire un roman télématique?
On avait simplement envie de faire une simulation, voir si c'était possible en fait, de dévier un peu de l'utilisation du Minitel ordinaire, bon, c'est-à-dire les banques de données, tout ça, les choses assez linéaires, pour raconter des histoires. Enfin, on était très excités par l'idée de faire des trucs sur écran, simplement. Bon, enfin, on n'avait pas une idée derrière la tête concernant la diffusion, puisque il y a 3 ans, en fait, c'était assez difficile d'imaginer qu'on pourrait diffuser un truc sur le Minitel. Graphiquement parlant, c'est toujours très schématique, des dessins schématiques, très primitifs.
Vos images sont en couleur?
Oui, toutes les images sont en couleur. C'est aussi enfin, on peut lister tous les inconvénients de Minitel. C'est vrai, bon, il n'est pas en couleur, il a une lenteur d'affichage dramatique.
I'm going to stop here because it's just talking after and it's in French, so it doesn't make sense to continue. So, future workshops allows us to reconstruct other screens from this video archive and also from the artist's memories. So here you can see the Venus that you can see at the beginning of the video, the retranscription on paper. I was also writing the hexadecimal code under the image on paper. And then I was coding it directly for the Minitel. So you can see the reconstruction on Minitel on the bottom right. So this reconstruction is totally unconventional. It was really guided by the anarchist spirit of Camille and Jacques-Élie, and they were not really interested into the accuracy of the reconstruction, but rather into its artistic productivity. I'm gonna show you in video of the animation that we reconstructed on the Minitel, directly on a color Minitel, so you can have an idea of the animation and the rest of it. You can see here the animations that couldn't appear on the sale screens, of course. So these reconstructions are not intended to maintain a work with obstinacy, okay, but to give it an afterlife. If the media-archaeological reconstruction of video text poems or l'objet perdu contains simulated elements, okay, the microserver, for example, they are never hidden into our exhibitions. In fact, there's reconstruction purpose to see not only a work, but also, and above all, an archive. Perhaps not a completely living archive, but a afterlife archive, which aims to make accessible in the most accurate way possible what the life of the work was like. And to share, there's archives with the public, the collective activates in 2019 a new Minitel network, the WIPITEL. This network enables telematic services to be hosted and broadcast again on a global scale. To access it, you need a Minitel device with a DIN socket, and thanks to a simple box provided by PAMAL, anyone can connect to the WIPITEL network. At the same time, we are offering our first service, an archive of old and recent telematic works of art called 3615 Love, 3615 Love. 3615 was the code you had to enter to access the services at that time. So for example, for the train, 3615 train or something like this. It is the first reconstruction of a telematic exhibition. So WIPITEL is a hardware-software package created and developed by us, PAMAL, offering the possibility of completely rebuilding a Minitel service in a processing and Arduino environment. To recover the notion of network, we used two techniques. Wi-Fi gateway connected to the Minitel by a serial port, WIPITEL 1, and Wi-Fi gateways connected to the Minitel by sound, WIPITEL 2. So several Minitels can thus be on a network, connected to a central server. This server has been programmed and structured to display video pages between which a navigation defined by key combination is possible. So this is the server you can see on the Raspberry screen, and the Minitel connected. A tree structure is programmed using a current format, JSON. The telematic pages are in video text format, VDT, and the navigation between the image, the Minitel pages is done directly on the device thanks to the keyboard. We were able to exhibit the spaces in Cerisy in 2018 and at the Cookie Party in Paris in 2019. So PAMAL promotes the necessity of restoring works by conserving their writing, which means keeping the writing machine with which it was written and with which it is meant to be read. By restoring the work, we preserve languages, technical know-how, and uses, which are not lost anymore. We do not write with an Apple II as we do with a MacBook. We do not connect to the network with a Minitel like with a smartphone. Not losing this knowledge allows us to pass it on and enrich the technological possibilities of the future. Nothing says that history is linear. Nothing says that technologies are not resurgent in another form. Nothing says that the Minitel is not the future of the Internet. Thank you very much.
Dear Morgane, thank you for your presentation. Now we will go ahead with Q&A. Last year, I read an article in the New York Times, I think, titled "The Art of the Internet: Restored and Art in the World." In this article, Eduardo Kex says that this network no longer exists, means Minitel network. Just like the Internet, we have will one day no longer exist. There is a general misperception when we talk about online culture. And everyone is so obsessed with the Internet, but to me it's a historical phenomenon. It will be superseded by other networks in the future. Wow. If so, I want to ask to you, can the impact of an artwork be conserved, considering it has been technically conserved just as it was? What I mean is, generally people do not remember what is the Minitel network. So today, can we say these artworks are still alive? We don't live in Minitel worlds, but we can we say that these artworks are still alive. What do you think about?
This is why we wanted to recreate the network and not just the artworks, because it was kind of not easy, but it was easy to recode the artworks, like they really look like the originals, and to put them on a Minitel, on a podest inside an exhibition. It was super easy. But what we wanted to do is to reproduce the experience of being at home in front of your Minitel and access the service. So really type in with your phone. So it was really clear, like you take your phone, you type in the number you want to access, you wait for the beep, and then you click on the connection. So when we started this, I was super young when the Minitel appeared at home, and I was more used to internet. So I had no remember how to call Minitel network. So this is really like user knowledge that we lost. And I mean, 2012, it's not that far. And so by recreating like a simulated server for the Minitel was just really to recreate the experience of connecting to a server, a Minitel server connecting to the network, looking for information with this multiple choice novel, also to navigate inside like an history. And so it's not exactly the experience of before, but you are still having how to use a Minitel, how to call a service. And we also created a chat, so you can also communicate with our people remotely with the Minitel. So it's really about the experience and really, really about the knowledge, like how we were able to do creation. And we really realized that the constraints of creating images for Minitel is really high. So we really had to we could identify to the artists when they did it, and how it must have been so much struggle to create those beautiful images of colors with single character for each of the bytes. And it's really like more like retro memory, like really putting us in the shoes of the artists and also of the users of that time. So it's more living archives of what it was, and we are not pretending to show exactly what it was, but just reproduce the experience of the Minitel network, so it's not lost. Because the young of today, they don't know what it was, and it was actually extraordinary that France could do a parallel network to internet, and it wasn't easy and it didn't work, but it was really extraordinary for a small country.
Thank you so much. And my second question. The case, the artworks based on online services I'm working on nowadays. When online services disappear, these artworks will die. And according to this point of view, reconstruction is impossible in this case. If we talk about this type of artworks, can the documentation replace the artwork?
I think it's Rhizome that is proposing a web recorder, so you can also record the experience of the website and navigate inside like it was before. But I will maybe let Lozana explain this after. So you can, with this tool, you can have also the experience of the website. Documentation is also good to show the aesthetic of the web page at that time or the application at that time. We can also encapsulate things offline if it's not really linked to things outside. And we wanted to lead experimentation because I'm also working at ZKM, so the Museum for Art, Center for Arts and Medium in Karlsruhe in Germany. And we were thinking of working into, I don't know if you know the artwork Net Art Generator from Cornelia Zollfrank. It's making images by gathering images from the internet And of course, it was creating in 1997, and the aesthetic of images on the internet has changed a lot. So we wanted to gather images from the 90s and do kind of a frozen version of NetArt Generator so that people can see what the artwork looked like before and now how it looked like now with the aesthetic of today. So there are experimentation going on, but it's true that if it's linked to something outside like Google Map or Google Search API, the only thing we can do is just to film or to document, to make, you know, screenshots and video screenshots. But it's gonna be quite a catastrophe in the future. And I think there are people that started to archive Google Earth to do version of artworks offline with offline Google Earth. Yeah. But it's true that it's moving super fast, and we almost have to, like real virtual reality, we have to think about preservation at the moment of creation, which is kind of crazy. Now, as you think about it, we are preserving present more than we are preserving past, and we are almost preserving future before it arrives. So it's moving super fast, especially in net art.
Another question from Chris King at State Modern. Is it viable for smaller institutions to set up and maintain a Minitel network for exhibition? Are there resources online? Does PAMAL post some info? And thanks for an amazing talk. Says that, please. Thank you, Chris.
We can provide the Raspberry, which is into the Wifitel server. Everything is open source and is on our website, pamal.org. And yeah, it's really easy to implement Minitel on any museums now because it's working with internet, with Wi-Fi. So if you're interested, you just have to ask, and we will provide this Wifitel box. It will be really nice to create a network between museums in Europe and even among in the world, which will be like more than ever expected by the French telecom network. But yeah, this is really a dream if it happens.
Thank you, Morgane. I think that's all questions. This is. And I think we can press the second part. And thank you again for this amazing talk. In the second part, Lozana Rossenova from Rhizome will make the presentation titled Modern NetArt Provenance, a new approach to the interface and infrastructure of Rhizome's ArtBase archive. This talk will focus on Lozana's collaborative doctoral research project with digital arts organization Rhizome. The project aims to develop a theoretical and practical approach towards the redesign of the interface of Rhizome's historic archive of NetArt, the ArtBase. In this talk, she will discuss the value of taking a multidisciplinary approach, looking to archival theory, digital preservation, and software studies in order to develop a critical design practice. And she will share some of her current research findings. Lozana is particularly interested in open source and community-driven approach to digital preservation infrastructure. Besides her academic work, Lozana works with arts and/or technology organization in helping them plan and implement digital archive solutions or develop new pathways of interaction for challenging user workflows. Now I will give floor to her. Dear Lozana, please, you can start.
Thank you, Osman. And as everyone can probably notice, I had to change scenery a little bit. The other part of my house was getting a bit noisy, so hoping the living room will be quiet, but I apologize in advance if you hear any construction noises. throughout my presentation. Hopefully nothing though. So I think I'll just try to share my screen now. So hopefully you can all see this presentation prepared. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger on my screen. Great. So hello everyone, and it's really nice to be here. Huge thanks for the organizers of the event for the invitation, and thanks for everyone joining us via the live stream today. So my talk today will focus on my collaborative PhD study with the Center for the Study of the Networked Image at London South Bank University and Rhizome. In the summary of my talk, which Osman just read, I had to submit that summary many months ago now, before the pandemic started, and well, I still thought, we'll be able to travel and visit the museum in person. So at that long time ago, I outlined a couple of points in that summary, and I hope I will cover most of them today. And I hope the talk will be of interest to everyone joining the live stream, but it will not be a very traditional preservation talk. You will see what I mean, hopefully, pretty soon as I start. So I just wanted to start quickly with an overview of Rhizome and my main object of study at Rhizome, the ArtBase. I assume many of you are familiar with the organization, but bear with me while I just introduce the organization over a few bullet points for everyone joining us who may not know who Rhizome are. So Rhizome started out as a community-based mailing list and an online platform in 1996 in New York, founded by artist Mark Tribe. Since 2002, they have been based on premises in the new museum in New York, although of course, with the ongoing pandemic situation, everything's been moved remotely and we all work remotely at the moment. Rhizome maintain an active artistic program promoting born digital art projects, organizing exhibitions, special events with artists, curators, academics, etc. And since 1999, they maintain one of the largest online archives of born digital art, the ArtBase. The archive has over 2,000 artworks, and it started out as a grassroots initiative, originally with an open submission that everyone could submit works to the ArtBase. And since 2013, open submission has been closed. And over the last few years specifically, the archive has essentially been in a sort of put into a sleep mode while we do essential maintenance. So what underpins the research project with Rhizome is, of course, Rhizome's digital preservation program. However, I won't really talk about this today, as my supervisor at Rhizome, Dragan Espenshit, actually already did a talk at this very series of events last year. And in case you haven't seen it, the talk is online on the digitalSSM website, so you should really check it out. What I will talk about today is how some of the outcomes of this program impact the ArtBase, and I will focus specifically on the design of the interface of the archive and the data that contextualizes the artworks, and how all of that relates to matters of digital preservation as well. So at the beginning of my research in 2016, the ArtBase had already been overhauled several times, both in terms of the backend infrastructure as well as front-end design. I developed this timeline in order to trace the history of the archive and start to better understand what events led to different instantiation of the archive itself, and more specifically to the latest iteration, which I came to learn more about when I joined Rhizome. So in 2016, the landing page of the archive was integrated into Rhizome's main website. It offered a few curated exhibitions and a single entry point to the artworks, a grid of thumbnail images representing every artwork in the archive. Once a user clicked on an artwork thumbnail, they accessed a landing page for the artwork record. But those pages hardly looked like a typical archive database entry. There was a single image representing the work, a short text description with most often not specified provenance, and only the name of usually a single artist and a single date. To experience the actual works, users could click on a button which would take the user to a new location in a new tab. sometimes linking to a work held in Rhizome's archival repository, sometimes linking to a location on the artist's own server. And on frequent occasion, rendering a 404 page, or in other words, a missing link. Even when the link was not broken, the artwork that the user would gain access to might be in a very different state compared to the time the work was added to the archive. Parts of the work may be broken, missing, or dependent on browser plugins no longer supported in contemporary browsers. All of these scenarios lead to perplexing and frustrating user experiences in the archive. And maybe just to not be so opaque, the particular example I'm showing here is basically giving us this error message, meaning that it is refusing to connect to a particular online service that the artwork needs. In this case, I think edition.cnn.com, which was an old version of the CNN website service. And so this artwork, even though we have a copy of it in our archival repository, we're not actually able to render any kind of user experience because it is missing all of these kind of essential external services that it depends on. But so with no contextualization on the archival interface to indicate to users how these works came to be, even the works that were actually well preserved by the active interventions of the digital preservation team at Rhizome were subject to the same limitations and sort of limited interaction patterns within the ArtBase interface design framework. This framework was not able to answer questions such as who was involved in the artwork production, maybe more collaborators than a single artist, how the work evolves over time. Did the artist made intentional changes? Did the work change because of updates in the technical protocols of the web and the browsers used to access the web? Or did the ArtBase team change the work in order to preserve it? Rhizome's team were, of course, aware that the limitations of traditional approaches to digital archival interfaces impacted the value of the ArtBase and NetArt archives in general as a service to the NetArt community. And Rhizome were, of course, keen to explore alternatives, and this is sort of how my own research project came about. So reimagining the ArtBase interface in a way that could better support and make clearly visible to users all the efforts that went into preserving the works required more than a redesign around surface level branding and styling. It necessitated considering how a digital archival system for born digital materials works and for whom. In what ways should an archive management system address the links between a front-end interface used by the public and the various tools and infrastructures deployed by the in-house staff to store and preserve the artwork data, as well as the artwork's contextual metadata? So this kind of very fuzzy animation that you're seeing in the background of this slide is actually a graph diagram I was able to pull via the query service that we're currently using in the new ArtBase database. And it's not essential that you can't really see any details in this thing. It's just sort of trying to show a little subset of the data that we're working with and how even with just a little subset of the data, we can already show a wealth of relations that exist among metadata entries when we sort of give up on thinking about the ArtBase interfaces, this kind of very traditional single object oriented kind of interface. And this is more like a zoomed in version into that graph diagram that I was showing on the previous slide. So instead of thinking of the ArtBase interface as some kind of top layer in a conventional technical stack consisting of software and hardware, in the research project with Rhizome, I approached the ArtBase as a network of relations between users, which includes institutional staff, artists, programmers, different kinds of collaborators, academics, the audience, and the digital infrastructure. So it's relations between all of these groups of users and digital infrastructure. Unpacking these relations sets up the core issues of my research project and what I seek to address with my research. So many of these issues are closely associated with the question of what constitutes a NetArt piece. And I know throughout the series of events organized by digitalSSM, you've all probably heard quite a lot about what NetArt is or isn't, but I'm just going to do a kind of very brief recap in this slide. So as Dragan Espenshid already discussed in his talk last year, net artworks are not single self-contained objects. To be performed and experienced, net art depends upon alignments between hardware and software environments, network protocols, as well as user interactions. It can evolve over time into various instantiations, either because of intentional actions by the creators of the work, or because of intervention by institutional staff at the archive working to preserve and or exhibit the works, or because of structural changes in the software or network components of the work's network assemblage. So Rhizome referred to all of these different types of instantiations that may emerge throughout the life cycle of the artwork as a variant or variants. So here is an illustration of just a sample of possible variants of an artwork in the ArtBase, all stored in different locations and presented in different environments. This particular artwork is called Untitled Crowbars by Dutch artist Jan Robert Leegte. All of NetArt's particular properties around performativity, processuality, and potential existence across multiple instantiations, or as we call them variants, adds complexity to the efforts of any institution to collect, preserve, and in the end, to make such works readily accessible to the public via an online interface. And in this kind of like last bit around making these works accessible to the public via an online interface is where I position my own research contributions. So I will go back to the Scrollbars artwork a little bit later in the talk, but first I want to mention another relevant example. And this may be very familiar to a lot of you. I also added a little screenshot of this in my one of the earlier slides where I was talking about Dragan's contribution to this series of events. This artwork is also the last artwork in the NetArt anthology exhibition that Rhizome staged in the last couple of years. So it is, I think, fair to say that it's one of the most recognizable artworks in the archive and also in NetArt canon in general. It's a diagram illustrating the core component of all NetArt, the network. The image of simple NetArt diagram, that's the title of the artwork. And it's an artwork by collective MTA released under a CC license, so Creative Commons license. So this image has been reproduced countlessly across the web and in print, most recently inspiring the title of the physical exhibition that accompanied the NetArt anthology exhibition that Rhizome staged online. And this physical exhibition first opened in the New Museum, and it was titled The Art Happens Here. Simple NetArt diagram is not only a famous NetArt piece, but also an example of the types of complex temporalities and entangled relationships between work variants commonly encountered in the ArtBase. As the artist explained in a blog post in 2015 detailing the history of the work, the dating of the work was never straightforward. After an initial release as part of another artwork in 1998 called Time, the standalone GIF file was released in the year 2000. But the canonical version has a date included in the GIF image itself, circa 1997, as you can see here in the top right corner of the slide. According to the artist, they found a source file on their machines with creation date metadata that said 1997. So they decided to revise the creation date of the work as well. And the artists themselves have warned in a post to Rhizome's mailing list back in 1999 that confusion and multiple truths should be a part of NetArt's official strategy. This is not some sort of a accidental coincidence. It's all intentional. The ArtBase has records for several MTA artworks, Simple NetArt Diagram and Time being among them. The Simple NetArt Diagram date in the ArtBase is given as 1997, while Time is dated as 2002. Time was added to the archive actually as a cloned copy. In other words, a copy stored on Rhizome's own server repository. And that cloned copy was submitted in 2002, which accounts for that difference in dates which we see across the different records in the ArtBase, and when compared to the artist's own website. In this example, the line between the creation date of a source file and the date accepted as part of the art history canon is blurry, intentionally so. What is more, in the history of the artwork narrated in 2015, the artists in a blog post online, the artists also list a number of other artworks, some created by other artists too, which are variations based on the canonical diagram. And if I go back to the previous slide, in the bottom left corner, you see one of those other variants created by another artist at a completely different time. So being able to connect all of these different variants and timelines in the ArtBase database through a flexible metadata framework would reveal more than just an interesting historical narrative. It can also help represent at least some of the processual, performative, and networked characteristics that make the artwork a net art piece rather than just an object whose material characteristics we can fully capture in just a few basic descriptive metadata fields. So to this end, in my research, I propose a new framework for modeling data in the ArtBase, which carefully considers the temporal dimensions of net artworks, involving development, deterioration, and/or various acts of preservation performed by different agents, human and/or machinic, over time. It aims to account for changes in a work's technical or user interaction makeup due to an active intervention by the artist, or due to a contextual event outside the control of the artist, such as a component becoming obsolete. Additionally, if a preservation action, such as the addition of a web archive or emulated instance of the artwork had been carried out, this can also be included alongside information about the agent who carried out the preservation action. This framework is also able to describe a variety of possible connections emerging among metadata entries in each record, such as the dependence on a specific plugin and the correlating emulation configuration, which may be necessary for preservation, for instance. The overarching conceptual principle connecting these different modalities of the framework is not any particular metadata standard, but rather the principle of archival provenance. And before I move on to explain a little bit more about that, I just want to say that what I'm showing in this slide is just a small part of the overall data model. This chart actually shows where provenance data is aligned to a variant record and where provenance related data also aligns to a variant record. The full data model, I'll explain later where you can find that, but this is just one particular section of it. So to get back to the concept of provenance, I propose to use the term provenance used widely in archival science, as well as, of course, many other fields of curatorial studies, museum studies, art history, etc. And I propose to use this term in a very specific sense. So I want to use it as the summative expression of a data model framework that can represent the complex context around artwork records in the ArtBase. The term is appropriate, I think, if an expanded notion of provenance is taken into consideration as advocated by postmodern archival science scholars, such as Bryn Brothman, Terry Cook, Chris Hurley, among many others, starting since early 90s. The archival record in postmodern archival science is no longer understood to be a static, value-neutral entity, but rather a dynamic process of creation, production, and interpretation, which is carried out by multiple agents, including the authors, archivists, and the larger cultural context of memory institutions. Given the theoretical developments around the conception of the archival record as a process, rather than just a thing, consisting of dynamic relationships, archival scholars have recognized the need to expand the definitions or even redefine core archival concepts such as context, provenance, and authorship, particularly in relation to born digital artifacts in digital archives. In the case of the NetArt archive, provenance description and authorship in the archive need to be considered not only because the artifacts in the archive are digital and networked, but also because of the context of a community-specific culture around digital spaces emerging with the mainstream spread of accessible network connections since the late 80s and developing further into the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century. This culture is quite different from traditional Western archival and curatorial understanding of the artist as a sole creator of a unique object. multiple contributors with different roles and levels of contribution, ranging from artists and programmers to audience members, as well as multiple variations of the artworks involving all or some of the above actors, complicate the more traditional readings around authorship and provenance. So I'm suggesting that this kind of condition results in a plurality of agencies that we need to be able to account for in the data models that we're working with in an archival infrastructure context, and also on the level of the interface. So the focus of the provenance-driven data model moves away from a description of siloed objects towards establishing patterns or recipes for describing the relationships between concepts, entities, and agents. Looking to other community or domain-specific metadata standards that may be familiar or already in use by ArtBase users has also been helpful in selecting the terms as well as patterns of relating data in the new ArtBase model. So we didn't just, of course, develop the provenance framework in isolation. We looked at a range of different standards, and the slide here is not comprehensive. It's just showing like a very small amount of these. However, after looking at a range of standards, what we realized was that the established metadata schemas or ontologies for archival or museum institutions tend to focus overwhelmingly on the description of physical objects, and are not really readily applicable to the NetArt case study. Many of these standards are designed to operate in siloed environments and still conform to narrower, more limiting conceptions of provenance, authorship, and context around records. Examples of limited utility which have already been considered in previous instantiations of the ArtBase infrastructure include standards such as Dublin Core or CDWA, which stands for, as I have on the slide, Categories for Description of Works of Art. Even more expansive standards such as CDOC CRM focus predominantly on physical objects and the events that bind them in their physical environments. In contrast to traditional cultural heritage standards, models from the field of digital preservation and web standards have been focusing on the description of processes and relationships already for some time, actually. So Premise is an example of this kind of standard. It's an event-based standard for describing digital preservation metadata, which is widely used in the digital preservation community. However, the level of abstraction in Premise is of a degree that at Rhizome we have not found particularly useful. We feel that it's more useful to managers of digital asset repositories, for example, who need to perform actions such as monitoring checksums or file format validation, than to the curators and conservators of Rhizome, who are concerned with artistic and historic integrity of the artworks, not just the technical integrity. So again, we felt like that particular standard didn't really fully meet our needs. And in contrast, we looked at a different standard from a different field, PROV, a model developed by the Provenance Working Group at W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, specifically to express the provenance of digital data on the web. It provides an efficient approach to representing data at a variety of scales, from a single graphic file to entire websites. With a limited ontology of properties and entity categories, but highly abstracted patterns of relating concepts and entities, PROV provides a flexibility needed for modeling heterogeneous, non-standardized digital artifacts, like NetArt works, in fact. At its most abstract, the PROV model can be described as a network of relations between entities, agents, and activities following a few formal patterns, such as illustrated in this diagram here, derivation, generation, and association. What do I mean by this? So relationships of derivation can help express the links between multiple variants of the works in the archive. It expresses relationships such as one variant deriving from another, or one variant being an alternate instance of another variant. Relationships of generation then can add additional technical specificity to the processes of creation, like how do these derivations or alternate versions came about. And finally, the relationships of association or attribution can provide the accountability of agents and their influence on the archive, which has been emphasized in postmodern archival theory. In a research case study project carried out in collaboration with art historian and researcher Dr. Karin de Wild, whom I believe may be on the live stream today. So hi, Karin, if you're watching. So in our collaboration between 2018 and 2019, we argued and proposed that PROV is applicable to the case study of net artworks, since unlike other provenance standards, which tend to focus on a single entity like the art object and its history of ownership, PROV describes, and I quote here, the people, institutions, entities, and activities involved in producing, influencing, or delivering a piece of data or a thing, end quote. In a paper published in the IPRES 2019 proceedings, IPRES is a digital preservation annual conference. So in our paper there last year, we argued that several key characteristics of the PROV model make it particularly well suited to the needs of NetArt. And I'm just going to read this quote because I think it sort of outlines these characteristics pretty well. So the PROV model not only captures the creation of the artwork, but also how various actors contribute to or influence the work over time. For instance, these may include individuals or institutions who commission, acquire, transfer, or modify the work. Furthermore, PROV-DM, that stands for PROV data model, can capture the different variations of a single artwork, even when these are preserved across various institutions. A single internet artwork can be included in multiple museum collections, web archives, whilst at the same time remaining a part of the live web. So in our case study and in our paper for IPRES, we tested the application of the PROV model to a specific artwork from the ArtBase. And remember when I told you I'm going to come back to the scroll bars artwork? Yeah, so this is it. We used Untitled scroll bars for our case study. And so in the test application, we traced the authorship of the artwork and all of the variants that we had available in the ArtBase. And we sort of traced how they derive from each other, from different variations. And also we traced the authorship of these different variants and the kinds of forms of generation activities and also attributions and associations to different agents in the network. And I'm not going to go into great detail explaining this diagram because our paper is available online on the IPRES website, and it's a very short paper, so you can delve into the details if you're interested. Okay, so PROV is a great model, but it's a conceptual model, right? How do we implement it? So PROV can be implemented in a linked data knowledge management system. This is actually possible with the ArtBase because Rhizome have been using Wikibase, which is a linked data database, as our collection management system since 2015. Wikibase is the open source software environment built to run Wikidata. Wikidata is a knowledge base of public domain linked data maintained by the non-profit Wikimedia Foundation. In the case of the ArtBase, Wikibase is deployed as a standalone instance independent from Wikidata, while it still follows RDF, which stands for Resource Description Framework Data Modeling Conventions, which allow the data to be published as part of the semantic web. A Wikibase instance requires custom configuration of concepts and properties. So this allows us to be more independent than a kind of global knowledge management system like Wikidata, which is quite general and encompasses multiple knowledge domains, and in the end is not that useful to us. We can use Wikibase and still be part of the semantic web, but configure exactly the concepts and properties we want. So this is how Rhizome's Wikibase can adopt some of the particular properties and terms from the ontology of PROV and the data model relationships. So the loose couplings of entities, agents, and activities provides the basic building blocks of a framework for the custom ArtBase data model, which can describe provenance data such as relationships of derivation or association, as well as a range of other administrative, descriptive, and technical metadata related to artwork, variants, agents, or software entities in the archive. This additional data can also be expressed with statements using the PROV ontology where suitable, but there's no strict requirement to do so. The new data model for the ArtBase builds upon the provenance framework by implementing the majority of properties and concepts provided by the PROV ontology, but it also includes a range of custom properties which extends the technical domain of the framework towards the specifics of preservation actions conducted at Rhizome. And this slide here just demonstrates how we implemented PROV partially for the Untitled Scrollbars case study, but of course, this is just a small subset of statements that you see on the screen here. We we actually have a more expansive set of statements available in the ArtBase that can extend into this technical context. So if I go back to this kind of bigger diagram that I was showing earlier around the kinds of properties and data we can associate with a variant, in this slide, I'm focusing specifically on this right-hand side, which is the more expansive provenance-related data, right? So these include recording the technical or media resource dependencies of the net artworks, as well as the environment and or interaction patterns required for the reperformance of the artworks. And you can see here once again, how all of this is specifically related to a variant, right? So it's not, we're not attaching these kind of individual properties to an artwork in general, but we are being very specific about each variant in the archive and how we approach representation and reperformance of those. And beyond regarding the relation between an artwork variant and a particular, beyond recording the relation between an artwork variant and a particular plugin or environment, the framework can also record relations to particular generation or archival activities. Again, I'm sorry if these kind of tables are not very clear. It's very hard really trying to figure out how to represent a data model in a way that's not horribly dry and boring. But so what I'm showing in this slide specifically is the kinds of generation activities and archival plans we can have in the ArtBase, and then what kinds of properties we want to attach to them. So we want to be talking about different tools or resources that we use for a generation activity which creates a particular variant. And we also want to talk about archival plans, or the kinds of sort of recipes that the preservation team applies to a specific archival preservation procedure. And the types of procedures I've listed here, just a small sample drawn actually from the NetArt Ontology exhibition procedures, which were outlined in the book accompanying the exhibition. And there's a really great online resource, which I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with, that Rhizome released. It's available from their website, so I'm sure you can find it. It's a Google spreadsheet that outlines these kinds of different archival activities that happened throughout the exhibition. But now what we're doing with the ArtBase is actually trying to make these kinds of activities into real data and like include that data into the ArtBase rather than into the archival infrastructure, rather than just having them published in a book, right, or in a spreadsheet somewhere separately. Lastly, well, this is like the end of the provenance data framework. So the last slide about it. The provenance-driven data framework also allows the description of exhibitions and other events related to the artwork or a particular variant. These may also play a role in the staging of specific reperformances and preservation actions by archivists. And now I will probably spend the last 10 minutes or so I have talking a little bit about the interface and how all of these kind of data models and approaches to metadata help us build different kinds of interfaces to the archive. So to sum up, the main issues I've been trying to address with the work on the provenance-driven data framework include NetArt's characteristic to change and evolve over time due to technical dependencies and performance requirements, or due to intentional interventions by the artists and archivists, as well as the related implications for collecting and preserving such works. These implications extend to the lack of means to articulate and meaningfully express multiple variants of an artwork as both the artwork and as individually distinct entities at the same time within a standardized museum registrar information system. In order to address this, I developed design prototypes and I ran several user research meetings and workshops over the years of my research as part of my practice with Rhizome. The prototypes communicate a set of new visual strategies to representing NetArt in the ArtBase, reliant on this new underlying data structure that I've proposed as well. So today I'll only discuss two specific elements of the prototype interfaces. First, variant access points. The access points to individual variants developed via the new ArtBase interface prototypes attempt to communicate two primary points. First, what variant is the user accessing and where? Is it under the care of the artist or the archive? Is it a web archive or an emulated instance of the work, etc.? And second, what is the condition of this variant? Is it completely inaccessible, partly damaged, or generally functional? Following evaluation sessions with Rhizome in-house staff and external users, the prototype designs added additional visual cues in the form of icons to differentiate between variants, as well as further terminology explanations available upon hovering over or clicking on the buttons. I should stress that these prototypes do not aim to be polished, finished interface mockups, but rather working documents to be used by various agents in the research process as a means of communication and also as a means of iteratively refining the data model and information architecture of the archive. There will be further phase of refining the visual design to be more in line with Rhizome's branding, as well as part of the ongoing implementation of my research within Rhizome's infrastructure, which is happening over the coming months. In addition to the variant access points, timeline visualizations are another key visual design and interaction tactic in moving away from the conventions associated with object-based museum collection records towards a performance-focused presentation contextualized within a particular time frame. In the new ArtBase interface prototypes, timeline visualizations replace the static way of dating an artwork applied in the ArtBase in the past, and also applied in many other typical institutional digital archives. Instead of the standard timelines deployed in these kind of more standard institutional interfaces to provide an overview of a whole collection. So basically, you know, a timeline is nothing new, like many other institutions use it, but they generally just use it to visualize a whole collection. In the case of the ArtBase, the timeline is applied granularly at the level of an individual artwork record. These visualizations acknowledge that a net artwork is not a fixed entity, but rather a time-based, performative and processual assemblage of multiple components, which often operate in parallel. Based on currently available data in the ArtBase, the timeline prototypes are prepared to map simple data points to begin with, like the date of inception of the artwork, or inception, by inception I mean creation, or kind of dates where the artwork stopped being active anymore, or as well as different exhibition or other events that happened. Notably, the term provenance actually is not really explicitly included anywhere within the timeline interface or the variant access points. Nevertheless, some users, particularly members of communities of archival practice, were able to pick up on the potential of these interface visualizations to serve as provenance research tools. As some users noted during workshop sessions with the prototypes, and I quote here, the timeline is in the prototype are great provenance tools. It shows the conception of net art and the changes it's been through, end quote. And then I have another quote. Love the timeline visualization tool in my various archival work environments. This is one of the most basic yet confusing aspects of understanding a work, end quote. So the timeline visualization design tactic provides an at-a-glance temporal context for the various instantiations or variants of a work and respective provenance, which is something that basically many users, particularly academics and researchers, have been requesting since I started doing the user research process. Now, I know I'm probably getting close to 40 minutes already, so there's a couple of slides I can skip and I can just go straight to conclusion, or if it's okay, I can take another 5 minutes and just add a few more details around the interfaces, but I wonder if the hosts can tell me if it's okay to take an extra 5 minutes. Or basically tell me if you want me to stop. I think I'll just keep going unless you tell me to stop. So we have enough time? Okay, cool. I think it's just gonna be an extra 5 minutes if that's okay. So the presentation so far has established the proposition that the ArtBase archive is a network of relations. Mm-hmm. I can still see, it seems to me like I'm sharing my slides only, but maybe I can stop the share and restart it.
Yes,
Better?
you can. Yes, no problem.
Okay, so you don't see any notes or anything distracting, right? But the desktop is the presentation. Yeah, it's like a black background of the slide and like 3 different screenshots on top of it. So I hope that is what you all see. That's the slide. Yeah, it's just a slightly unusual slide where I'm going to talk now a little bit about plural interfaces. So yeah, I hope you can actually see what I want you all to see. It's one of those Zoom mysteries. So I'm just going to keep talking, and then when I switch to the next slide, probably it will become more obvious if something's amiss with the presentation or not. So the presentation so far has tried to establish the proposition that the ArtBase archive is a network of relations which span across archival data, metadata, users, hardware, software, networking components, and more. The implication of the network concept is that while it is possible to speak of an archival infrastructure tightly coupled with an archival interface in general, a more precise expression of the network would in fact observe multiple infrastructures and multiple interfaces. As Dragan Espenscheid has noted in past conversations, quote, the ArtBase cannot be a single platform that embodies all the preservation techniques that Rhizome uses, but it can use the linked data database to connect across distinct technical approaches and preservation tools, end quote. Any connections that happen across the multiple infrastructures, all part of Rhizome's digital preservation program and part of the user experience of the ArtBase, should also be expressed via appropriate visual tactics for navigating plural user interfaces. Working with Rhizome over the past few years, I became familiar with the web recorder, which is now technically retitled to Conifer, at least within Rhizome, as well as the emulation as a service tools, which helped me prototype the relationships between the ArtBase interface and the presentation of artworks from the ArtBase via web archiving or emulation tools. While the ArtBase infrastructure would hold all the metadata for these artwork variants, including URL access points, and could present that to users via its visual interface, the actual execution of the artwork reperformance happens within the infrastructure of these separate tools. 2 additional prototypes were developed to propose a partial integration of ArtBase data into the presentation interfaces of these tools. The styling of these prototypes interfaces was distinct from the main ArtBase wireframes, but these interfaces too were conceived just as templates, which could be styled as and when required based on overall branding strategies at Rhizome. Their primary goal was to connect the user's experience from the ArtBase to that of the reperformance environment via the familiar ontology and conceptualization around temporal and performative context. Displaying details such as the original URL of the artwork, when it was archived and by whom, what archival actions were taken, if any, what particular dependencies inform the current presentation on view, all followed the provenance-driven framework of the new ArtBase data model and infrastructure. The role of the visual interface elements and the inclusion of contextual metadata here was, once more, to act as a communication tool for users who might access the artworks via different routes, for example, via a link shared on social media that leads straight to the reperformance, as opposed to going through Rhizome website, Rhizome archive front page, then digging deeper into individual artworks. But what would always happen if the users follow these pathways is that they would discover more relations across the network of connected infrastructures and interfaces that assemble the ArtBase because of these additional elements provided by these interface prototypes. And I should probably say that all of these prototypes, they are available on GitHub. I think I put a link. Yeah, so top right corner of this slide is the link. If you're interested in exploring in more detail later. So that's it, I'm concluding now. In conclusion, preserving NetArt involves various conservation actions on the data or software needed to reperform the works and make them accessible to users. But it also involves preserving and presenting data around the works that can document past conservation actions and inform future ones. The reperformance of the work is a collaboration between the artist, the archival organization, and the users accessing the works in their own browsers at home, facilitated via their archival interface. If this interface is to reflect and preserve the full complexity around these works, it needs new interaction patterns, such as access points to different artwork variants or timeline visualizations, among others. These are all made possible by a standards compatible but also flexible and customizable provenance-driven linked data metadata framework. And that's it. And now I can take questions. Also, if the hosts want to stop the slide share, it's up to them.
Thank you, Lozana, for this great presentation.
My pleasure. I hope it was okay, and I hope, yeah, it wasn't too weird, like when I had to switch a couple of times.
I think that your research report is open access now.
Yes, so I'm there. Like I think people, if they found me on Twitter or on my website, they can easily get to. There's like a special portfolio research website on Rhizome's main server where you can access different reports about the research and prototypes and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Your research is very important for net artworks and authenticity and historicity point of me, and especially I think the archive as a dynamic structure. What is the biggest change that you face in your research process?
Sorry, did you say challenge?
Yes, biggest challenge.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there were, I think, several challenges throughout the way. One was trying to really be inclusive in the research process and try to talk to as many people as possible. So not only stay within the bubble of Rhizome, but also talk to other people who may not be directly collaborators with Rhizome, but maybe accessing the archive for various reasons, whether it's research, study, art historical purposes, or curators who want to make exhibitions. So it was a challenge trying to really find a kind of diverse enough and inclusive group of people to discuss these questions with, because it's difficult questions and it takes time, and it's not simply calling someone for 10 minutes and just getting some answers. Like it had to be a kind of really conscious process, and also a process of design, right? Designing workshop sessions. And one thing that I found interesting was when we were trying to move the Rhizome infrastructure towards the linked data database, this also led in another layer of complexity, because when we were talking to other people, like users, and trying to do user testing or something, we had to also really explain the software. We had to really explain how linked data works, because it's so different from traditional relational databases. And I felt like my role became also one a little bit of training to some degree, and sort of really trying to explain to users in the most kind of straightforward way that I can find what is the linked database and how it works, so that then they can make their own assumptions and their own interpretations and also recommendations how we develop the interface. Another like kind of big challenge is kind of also related to this, is the idea of the open source community, right, around the interface and the sort of infrastructure of this linked data software that we're using, which is wiki-based, because we also needed to, so I needed to not only speak to people within the art world kind of interested in Rhizome, but I also had to speak to people who don't really care about art, and they just develop databases for different kind of maybe science or research project, but they use this kind of open source software. And it was really a sort of question of trying to bring different kind of community points of view together and sort of guide different multiple processes towards an end that was useful to Rhizome, right? Because Rhizome needed specific things to be developed for this software to be usable for art, like different kinds of interactions possible on the front end, which even to this moment are still not fully possible. So some of my prototypes are not yet implemented because we are in the process of working together with a bigger community of people involved in developing Wikibase, so that we can make the necessary components of the software that will allow this kind of front-end interface to work as well. But I mean, the back-end is in place, so kind of the data structure is there, and the interface is just going to be a work in progress for the next year or two, I reckon. So I guess the challenge is this kind of managing this influx process, right? Like multiple agents, again, like people involved in this network of relations, not just within Rhizome and the archive, but also within the software development. But it's also interesting, I think, and it's a kind of very, it's been a very informative process for me as a practitioner to learn like how all these different people and communities work. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Do you have any question to Lozana? You can type message your questions, please. And so I think so. No question anymore.
Maybe we should give people like a few minutes if they're still
Maybe
kind of.
Maybe Morgane wants to ask a question.
Or I can ask Morgane a question if she's still there. I had a question. Hey, Morgane. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
I was eating, so.
Fair enough. I was also moving a little bit during your Q&A, so I couldn't ask you something, but I was curious actually, and forgive me if I missed part of it, but as I was kind of moving my setup to a different room in the house, but I was really interested in this idea where you talked about how you didn't want to just reconstruct the artwork, but of course you wanted to, make the whole network available again so that actually users can really, properly dial into it and use it. I guess one thing that I was curious about is how do you think, this could work when users actually have lost this whole ability of really knowing what it is to dial into a modem, and like when a lot of people don't really have home phones anymore. Like I haven't had a home phone for the last maybe 14 years, since I left my home to go study and live abroad and all of that. So I kind of wonder if you thought about this idea of like, how do we preserve user memory around particular interactions? Because we have that same problem with the ArtBase as well. And sometimes, like some artworks require, even like basic things, like you have to right click on something, which is a very basic, interaction that I think a lot of people our age know, because we grew up with, I don't know, Windows PCs, whatever, and we all had to right click on stuff. But like people who are quite young and maybe are more used to like mobile devices probably don't even really know how to, use a mouse, its complexity or simplicity. So I wondered if you had any observations around your Minitel experience.
So when we are doing exhibitions, there are two different moments. Either we give them like a manual how to do it, either we look at people trying to do it. And this is also nice because parents are coming with their kids most of the time to the exhibitions, and we also exhibited in small cities like the Médiathèque in Avignon. So we did some really small places, Aix-en-Provence. It wasn't big museums, so it was more like family moments. And so you could see the grandparents or even the parents explaining to their kids how to use it. And I think when it's this moment of intergeneration knowledge passing on, the kids remembers. And this is collective memories, and then they will remember for a long time, like when grandpa or grandma said this and told me how to use a Minitel and what it was. And for bigger exhibitions where you have to be... you cannot have moderator, because for small exhibition we were around, we could explain too. But for bigger exhibition, we are just putting a manual how to do it on a small, a small cartel. And we never experienced the phone version. We only used the keyboard version, like where everything is already connected and you just have to type in. So next screen, or just choose 1, 2, or 3. It's only on small exhibition that we could experiment the phone dial and everything. But I think the best way to have this practice pass on is just exhibition. Please.
That's great. And did you also, I think 100%, like I definitely think we should have more exhibitions like that. But do you also document some of these experiences? Because I think that's really interesting, right? Even just for like your own conservation reports, to like document maybe those experiences where young kids like ask their grandparents how to do this stuff. Or...
We never had chance. Usually we are in the moment, and even in the cookie in Paris, we had a lot of new adult, and we just explained them. And it's true that we never filmed it because when we are exhibiting, we are the artists and not restorers, or we are not here as an archive or museum person. So we are more like in the dialogue with the public and everything. So it's true that we never did it, but if the next time we show it, I will think about it.
I think
it could be nice. Yeah.
It might be interesting. Yeah. Just as another layer of, you know, documentation that's more focused on the social memory than just a particular technical element. Mm.
We have no question, and I think unfortunately we finished the event here. Thank you for your contribution to our research project.
Thank you.
Is there anything you want to add now? Is there anything you want to add?
I just want to thank Lozana for all the presentations she did before, because now we are implementing a lot of things in the Museum of ZKM now. And she gave me her presentation so I can convince my museum to use Wiki, and now we have one, so thank you.
Oh, I'm so pleased. This is the dream of, you know, like spreading the research.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. And I just want to say thanks to Osman and the museum and all of our wonderful technical team for today's presentation running so smooth. It's been great.
Thank you, Osman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.